attendees are in listen-only mode.
Wayne?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Wayne Cowan, and you're listening to Attitude Magazine's weekly ADHD Experts audio broadcast. This is part of our 12-webinar series called 14 Weeks to Success at School, which runs through October. If you're a parent of a child diagnosed with ADHD or learning disabilities, you know how challenging it is to get your student to start and complete homework. Some parents have written in here and called it the homework wars, or worse. It can cause all kinds of stress throughout the household and leave us feeling a little exhausted and a little frustrated. Kids who find school challenging usually find homework challenging. Today's topic, Homework Made Simple, will be of great interest to you as it is to me. We will get tips and strategies for getting over the homework hurdles and easing the emotional challenges of working with our kids every night. Today we're very fortunate to have Ann Dolin with us. Ann has been teaching and tutoring for more than 2 decades. She founded Educational Connections, a tutoring company that has worked with over 8,000 students in the Washington, D.C. area. Ann is also author of the great book, Homework Made Simple. Today, Ann will talk about everything parents need to know for successful homework completion for kids in the 3rd to 12th grades. How to lower the stress levels, how to deal with all types of procrastinators, and how to help kids stay focused. If you're new to our webinars, post your questions in the box on your screen at the right. Ann will give an introduction for a few moments, and then she'll take questions for probably half an hour. If you have problems hearing us, dial in via your phone line. After the webinar, you'll find Ann's slides as well as a replay of the entire webinar. So if you missed something, you can listen to it again on attitudemag.com/webinars, which is on our website, attitudemag.com. So with that introduction, let me turn it over to Ann, and thanks again for being here.
Wayne, thank you so much for having me today. I'm honored to be a part of your webinar series. So for everybody out there, I'm wondering, what does your child struggle with when it comes to homework? I bet you can think of many things, but when I think back on all the kids I've worked with over the last 20 years, I see them as struggling for specific reasons. You know, some are disorganized. Others procrastinate, and this is very common with students with ADHD. Some are distracted, and distraction can come in 2 forms. It can come in the fidgety student and then the student who is really inattentive and has a hard time focusing. I also see kids that rush through homework, and often these kids actually get homework done very quickly, but their attention to detail is lacking. And then at the end of the day, many of the students we see, and I'm sure that live in your homes, are easily frustrated. And this is where we see meltdowns occur, crying, tears. Words that we don't mean to say to our kids can often be a part of the conversation. So frustration is something really common in students with ADHD. But even though our kids face all of these issues, it's so important to know that this is actually not a motivation problem. And it can be so confusing to us as parents and also to teachers, because often we have these kids that are really very smart. I mean, some kids we work with through my tutoring service have IQs of 130, yet they can't finish a math paper or write an essay or finish a worksheet. And there is, in many students with ADHD, a disconnect between their ability and their production. Although they're smart, what they produce in school is not a reflection of their cognitive abilities. And why? It's because, as we all know, executive functioning plays a big role in our students with ADHD. They really have difficulty in an area we call the frontal lobes. And this is the ability to help with focus, to sustain attention for a period of time, and to shift between tasks. So let's talk about the basics, because certainly whether your child has great difficulty with all of these areas or is just mildly impacted, there are things that parents can do that help all the kids in their family, even the ones that aren't really struggling. And there are two things: when to do homework and where. So let's start with the when. There are 5 times kids can do homework: right after school, after a 30-minute break, before dinner, after dinner, and before bed. And many of the kids we work with do really well, especially those at the elementary level, after about a 30-minute break getting started. And that means that, although every day may be different, you still have the same routine. So maybe Monday your child gets off the bus and you happen to be home. They get a 30-minute break, and then the expectation is to start homework. But perhaps on Tuesday they have soccer practice. When they get home from soccer, they still get a 30-minute break, and then the expectation is to start homework. So when you have a routine, you're less likely to get pushback. Older kids, however, tend to push the envelope in terms of starting later and later. They really tend to procrastinate more. And in fact, we know that procrastination really gets worse when kids go off to college. So anytime we can get our middle and high school students simply to start homework before dinner, that's a win. Where should homework be done? I used to think it should be in the same place every day, day in and day out. But actually research shows that kids should have multiple places to do homework. And it really does vary by learner. Sarah is a kid that I call her the Starbucks kid. Sarah is a student that I worked with, and she was actually a kid that could do homework in the hum of a busy area, and she preferred it. She could do homework at the kitchen table when there was a lot going on at the time, and actually that type of stimulation helped her to focus. And when I see adults in Starbucks these days, they're probably the Sarahs 20 years later. And these are people that actually do well when there's a little bit of action. And these are people, you see them in coffee shops. They've got all their books, they have their computer, they may as well have their printer, and they're ready to roll. Those types of people often were kids that could do homework with a little bit of action. But then we have other kids that aren't so much like that. They do need a quieter place. Jonah is actually a student that we worked with. Started with him a couple years ago, and one of the things his mom said is, he wants to do homework at the kitchen table, and it doesn't always work for him. She wanted him to do homework at a very quiet place, completely away from the family, and that didn't work either. So it turned out that he and his tutor set up a location in a guest bedroom on the same floor, so he could hear a little bit of what was going on. But it allowed him separation, and it was actually a happy medium between what he wanted and his mom wanted. And then a lot of students will have portable supplies so that they can move from place to place when they want to. Let's talk a little bit about the profiles. I mentioned disorganization. It's a big part of kids that struggle with ADHD. It's really common to have kids that have difficulty with paper flow. They have a hard time keeping track of paper. Sometimes our kids even do the homework and they can't find it the next day, and that is just so frustrating. And one of the issues that I've seen a lot and that my tutors have seen a lot is really the fact that kids aren't writing down their assignments in the first place. So even though they may have good intentions when they get home from school to do the work, they really don't even know what they're supposed to do because they haven't written it down. And to top it off, not every teacher posts the assignments regularly on their school's homework portal. So we have kids treat issues with organization as a subject, and we tell kids, look, you don't ever want to come home and you start English. You don't want to start math. You don't want to start homework. You don't actually want to start a subject. You want to start organization, and almost treat organization like a subject. Many of the students we work with are now going into class, and instead of writing down their assignments, they ask the teacher at the beginning of the year, can I take a picture of the board? And we really want kids to get in the habit of doing this right when they get into class. So often at the end of class, when they're trying to jot something down, the teacher is collecting the papers. She's, giving other instructions. Other kids are walking out the door, and it's so chaotic. It's clear why kids don't always write things down. So getting them in the habit of doing it right when they walk in, whether they write in their agenda book or they take a picture, is helpful. So when they get home, they basically have to transfer the information to their assignment book, and that can be looking at the picture and writing that information down. Maybe they already have it written down. And if they don't, they can look on their homework portal or call a friend. Also, we've seen that many students have such a hard time with hole punching and filing, and these are kids that actually do well with an accordion binder. I like the Case-It binders because they do have an accordion folder built in. We also have students, typically middle and high schoolers, that like the 14-tab accordion, and that allows them to have 2 tabs for each class. So, for example, in science, they have a tab for homework, but then they also have a tab for return papers or classwork. Handouts. I love the idea of using a launching pad, and in many families, the mornings are especially chaotic. One great way to get around this is the night before, have your child put everything that's related to school, which would be their backpack. Of course, their binders are in their backpack. Maybe it's their library books. Perhaps they need to bring their lacrosse sticks to school the next day or their cleats. But everything they need to bring to school the next day is put in their launching pad. And a launching pad is basically a bin or a box that's placed by the door from which the child is going to leave in the morning. So this way, they launch into a new day in an organized fashion. And finally, a lot of students we see fall into 2 categories when it comes to binders. They are either pack rats and they want to save everything, or they're purgers and they throw everything away. We love kids to get in the habit of about once a month going through their binders and taking out the things that they want to save that are important. And as they get older and have cumulative tests, it's really great for them to save old tests and quizzes. And I love this type of system. This is a Pendaflex hanging file folder, and I got it on Amazon and also on my website, which is ectutoring.com. If you go to our blog, it's ectutoring.com/blog. There's a little search in the top right-hand side. If you type in organization, you can see lots of articles on organization, and you can see this product as well to order it if you want. But I like it because it can hang on the back of kids' closet doors so they can see it regularly. And once a month or every few weeks, they go through their binders, take out those things that they really want to keep, and they file them away. And then finally, clean sweep is so important. You know, we can all start out the year with our kids being really, really organized, but I can tell you it won't stick unless there's regular maintenance. So this is a time, maybe 20 minutes once a week, where you program a clean sweep into your phone. And if your kids have phones, they do the same. So perhaps Sunday night from 7 to 7:20, everybody in a family, not just the disorganized kid, but everybody gets in on the act and is organizing something. So for kids, it's their binder, it's their backpack, could be their launching pad. And for adults, it could be, for moms, their purses, the junk drawer, bills, whatever. Everybody's doing something to maintain organization. So we also have kids like Penny who tend to procrastinate. And so often we see their procrastination as a character flaw. We see that, really my child just doesn't want to do this. But in reality, it's often the case that kids want to do it, but they just feel overwhelmed and underprepared, and so they can't get started in the first place. So how do you deal with kids that procrastinate? First of all, the barrier to entry has to be super low. It has to be something that's just so easy to do that virtually anybody can do it. And I often tell kids, you know that Nike slogan, just do it? You don't want to do that. You just don't want to do it. You just have to start it. For example, if it's an essay, maybe you just create the title page and write the first sentence. A math worksheet, maybe you just do the first 2 questions. So there are 2 ways you can do it. By task, and that would be a math worksheet. You just do the first few to get started. Or it could be by time. Set the timer for 10 minutes. I call this the tolerable 10. The idea is that anybody can do anything for just 10 minutes. And work as hard as you can, focus as best you can, just for 10 minutes. Often after that 10 minutes, kids will say, oh, you know what? I can keep going. They don't really need to take a break when the 10 minutes is up. Oh, and by the way, I love this product, the time timer. It's really great. It helps kids that don't quite get clock time with the analog clock. It allows them to see elapsed time. So as that red disc disappears, kids have a visual depiction of time. And sometimes it's our kids that struggle with not the daily homework as much as what to do when something is due in 2 weeks. And often for younger kids especially, time is just so abstract. And, sometimes teachers think they're doing us a favor as parents by saying, oh, don't worry, this book report isn't due until the last Friday of the month. You've got a whole month to do it. In reality, it's our kids are going to be the ones on Thursday night at 10 o'clock that realize they have the book report due tomorrow. So what do? One thing that our tutors love doing and really helps kids to think of time as more concrete is to take a Tootsie Roll and break it into 4 parts. And you say to the child, what are the 4 things that you have to do to get this book report turned in, to get this book report done? And the child might say, well, I have to read the book, I have to fill out this worksheet, then I have to write a rough draft and type a final copy. And then you can say, okay, great. When you get the first thing done, you get a piece of the Tootsie Roll. You can do the same thing with baseball cards. You take a stack of baseball cards, break them up into 4 little piles, get the first thing done, and you get the first little stack of baseball cards. So not that we're trying to bribe our kids, but sometimes getting them to think ahead in steps is super valuable initially. I also like the idea of working with distractible kids in a couple of different ways. First of all, it's important to remember that there are actually 2 types of distractible kids. We have our fidgety types. These are the kids that almost seem like Energizer bunnies. They're always moving. And then we have our inattentive students that seem like daydreamers a lot of times. There's a lot of research looking at, well, what do you do with those fidgety kids? Is the solution to just make them sit still? And there has been a lot of new recent research saying that actually kids that fidget need to fidget. Their bodies need that tactile stimulation. And so when they do things that we deem as kind of annoying by maybe clicking their mechanical pencil, rocking back in their chair, twisting their hair, biting their sleeve, things that they're always touching something. The reason they do that is that they need that stimulation because that stimulation actually calms them down. So instead of saying, stop doing that or taking it away, whatever they're playing with from them, consider giving them something like a Tangle Junior or a stress ball. On the left, this is called a Tangle Junior. It's basically a fidget toy that is research-based, showing that when kids can use this, and often they'll hold it in their non-writing hand, they're more focused during homework. On the other hand, we have kids that really aren't fidgety, but they take something that could be, could take 15 minutes and it takes them an hour to do it. I call these kids Super Bowl kids. When you watch the Super Bowl, it's on for about 3 hours, but really they play for an hour. It's just so drawn out. And many of our kids are like that too. So they need other ways to go about focusing instead of us poking and prodding and giving them 57 reminders. So one thing you can do is say, well, how many reminders do you think you might need? Often kids will say, well, just 2. And then as parents, it's our job to stick to 2. So we might just remind them, if we see them drifting off, okay, don't forget, you're on number 5 on your math. And really just giving them that set amount of reminders is key. It takes the nagging out of the equation. Also, setting a stop time is really important. And you might say to your child, you've been working on this math assignment for 45 minutes. It's 4:15. It needs to be done by 4:45. And then at that point, it's time to put it away. I'll give you 2 reminders like we discussed, but really be structured in that stop time and make sure your child is ending then. Kids really, really hate to go to school without their work done, but it really does help them to manage their time a little bit better, to know that it's not endless. And also let the teacher know if you're doing something like that and your child may come in with an incomplete assignment, they need to know why. So we also have kids that rush through homework. This is so common. In kids with ADHD. They're kind of the opposite of the Super Bowl child, but they do homework very quickly. And one thing that I really love for these students is called designated homework time. And it's basically based on the premise that kids should have about 10 minutes of homework per grade level. So like a third grader should have about 30 minutes of homework, a sixth grader about 60 minutes of homework. And if your child is miraculously doing homework for, say, a third grader in 3 minutes, even though you know they have a lot more, you can set that time and say, all right, Jimmy, you're going to have 30 minutes to do your homework each day, even if you say you have none at all. And set the timer and make sure that Jimmy has this designated homework time. So even if he says he's done, he still has to read for pleasure. Maybe you could practice his math facts. You could get ahead on a long-term project. But oftentimes that set period of time really reduces rushing because kids know that they're not going to get up and be able to play Xbox after 3 minutes. And also keep in mind that sometimes when kids rush and they have a hard time paying attention to detail, it's not always that it's not that they want to, make us upset or that they just disregard what we say when we say go back and check your work. When we say check your work, it hardly ever works. And the reason is that homework is kind of like a bell curve. When kids start out doing homework and they're in the thick of it, often their attention is at the highest, but when they're finishing an assignment, they're on to the next thing in their minds. Their attention has waned from that homework assignment. So when we say go back and check your work, it's like climbing that curve all the way back to the top again. And checking work is really tough for kids. So I encourage parents not to say go back and check your work. Instead, what you want to say is, as you're doing your homework and you come to one that's hard for you, circle that one. So then you can go back at the end and work through that with a little bit more time. I also encourage younger kids to make a game out of it, and I'll say, okay, let's say that you're going to review 5 questions that were hard for you. Put a little box on the upper right-hand corner of your worksheet, and every time you go back and you check one of those hard questions, give yourself a tally mark. We also work a lot with kids that are frustrated. And why does it happen, and why does what we say go in one ear and out the other? Well, when kids are upset, often their prefrontal cortex or their executive functioning skills are really diminished when they're in the moment. And that's because the amygdala, the emotion center of the brain, is really on fire. And when that's on fire, the prefrontal cortex isn't working too well. What do we do when that happens? Well, we all know that when we try to talk to our kids when they're in the midst of a meltdown, it hardly ever works. We must disengage. We can say something like, I can tell this is difficult. Come and get me when you're ready to start again. And you might go into another room and check your email and leave it in your child's court to come and get you when they're ready. But if you push the envelope and try to work with them at that moment, it typically doesn't go well. I also like the idea of practicing empathy. It's important to name the feeling. It helps kids feel like they're heard. I can tell you're frustrated. You know what? I completely understand why you're angry. Or, you're right, Mrs. Smith gave you a lot of homework tonight. I can see why you're feeling down about this. Naming the feeling is really powerful to kids. And when they're stuck, especially in a topic like math, you have 3 options. When kids are doing homework, we can say, oh, you don't know how to do number 5 on your math worksheet? Let me show you how. This is how you do it. We can say, you know what, honey, this is your homework, not mine. I was already in 5th grade. I'm not going to help you with this. Or we can say, are there examples in your book? Did your teacher give you any notes on this? Do you have anything written down on these types of problems? And option 3 is always the best way to go. And that's because you're giving kids the independent skills to look back and to try to figure out something on their own. But if we as parents are always intervening and showing them how it's done, they don't really have the skills to be independent later on. And so that's when we come to the type of struggle that is productive and one that is destructive. So destructive is a struggle that you don't want to see your child get in. Destructive would be a struggle where your child, for example, in math, has gone through the entire year, has a very poor foundation, and you've had a hands-off approach where you're really not intervening because everybody's told you you need to step back. And now they're in a situation where they do not understand the math and they really can't help themselves. It's hard to rebound from that type of struggle. A productive struggle is a little bit different. That's when perhaps your child doesn't understand a problem and you encourage them to find solutions. Those types of struggles are okay, and we don't want to protect our kids from those types of productive struggles. And certainly there's a difference between boys and girls when it comes to homework. You know, girls are pleasers. They can sit longer at a time. They are often stronger at reading and writing. But at the same time, they tend to have perfectionistic tendencies more than boys do. And as they get older, they will become argumentative, often going head-to-head with their mothers. And this is very well documented in research. It's not my opinion, but girls will often take out their frustrations in school with their moms. Boys have a different experience when it comes to struggle. Boys, you know, when they're younger and going forward, they tend to excel in math. Even to this day, boys tend to have slightly higher SAT and ACT scores than girls. Girls do better in verbal and reading and writing. Boys, when they struggle, they tend to become withdrawn. And instead of arguing and yelling and getting in a match with parents, they're the kids that will kind of get really quiet, go in their room and shut their door, and really give one-word answers. And so sometimes when boys are struggling, their way of voicing their struggle is different than girls. So in the end, we know that when it comes to ADHD, there is certainly a push and pull of academics. And I've found the more we push, you know, the more we're pushing on our kids to stay focused, to check their work, to do their best, and we're expecting something that sometimes is very difficult for them, the more they will push back. So if things are tough for your child, I always recommend getting outside help. It's typically the case that parents are not the best teachers, and I can't tell you how many times I've talked to parents and they say, you know what, I'm just so tired of being the homework police with my child. I really want to detach myself. This is affecting my relationship with my child. So anytime you can get consistent support for your student, it kind of takes you out of that emotional mix. And it has to be early on, because if it's late and your child has already dug a hole, it's really, really hard to get them out of the situation. So I always think it's important for kids to go in the school year with a lot of support, whether it's from you, from an after-school homework club, a local college student, or a professional tutor. Having something at the beginning of the year is far more powerful than taking the let's see how it goes approach and then digging out later on. So I have my email here. Here's my book too, and I welcome any feedback you have for me, any questions. Also, I wanted to mention, I mentioned our blog, which is ectutoring.com/blog. We have lots of articles on really anything you want to search for. But also, we have a lot of ebooks on our website, and they're completely free. And my favorite one that has received over 10,000 downloads is called How to Help Your Disorganized Student. We have another one called 3 Things to Reduce Homework Stress. That can be found on ectutoring.com/ebooks. So Wayne, that's all I have today. I'm wondering if some parents out there have questions.
Plenty of questions. That was a great presentation, Ann, I have to say.
Thank you.
Speaking of tutors, which you were sort of referencing a couple of slides ago, a couple of parents have asked, what types of skills should I look for in a tutor? I shouldn't just hire anyone. What should I be looking for?
You want somebody who has experience working with kids with weak executive functioning skills or ADHD. Somebody that is patient, kind, and understanding and realizes that this is not willful, that a lot of kids we see struggle with motivation. It's not that they don't want to do the work, it's just that their attentional issues are getting in the way. So anytime you can find somebody who has the experience with executive function or ADHD and is kind and patient, that's such a great combination. Mm-hmm.
Is there an ideal planner or assignment book you recommend? Because a lot of parents have asked, I have a feeling my child would be able to do the homework, but he doesn't always copy it down. So there's that gap between school and home.
Right. I've seen lots of different homework planners on the market. There was one we used for a while called H2O, and I'm not even sure if it's still on the market. But it was kind of neat because it allowed pictures of different things the kids had to bring home, and they could circle one. But I found at the end of the day, really, it doesn't matter what kind of planner your child has. It could even be, because sometimes as kids get older, they don't want to have a planner because it's just not cool. But they might have like a little memo pad that they can just slide in their back pocket, and they're more than willing to use that. And that is just fine. But the key really is when you get home to treat organization like a subject, and you don't want to start any assignments until you know what you have to do. There's also, for kids that really just completely struggle with that, there are a number of apps that are like assignment notebooks that you can have just in your phone if the teacher will allow you to use it. One is called iStudies Pro. There's iHomework as well. And then there's also My Tutor. Mm-hmm. And those are all good apps for kids that are all they're all electronic for kids that won't use a planner.
Mm-hmm. Many parents have asked, I want to help my child. It's in relation to teens, and the teens push the parent away. And it starts just a downward spiral of emotions. But it's very frustrating to parents who feel that they can come over and help their teen, finish their homework or give them insight into a problem, and they're pushed away. I'm not sure what you might have in terms of a strategy for that.
It's really common. It's incredibly common because if you think of it, your child is really at this point trying to create their own identity. It's just part of adolescence. It's part of human development. They're separating from their parents to kind of become their own person. So the last thing kids want is for a parent to be involved in homework. Although some kids are okay with it, very few really are. So that's why you have to decide what to do early on. Either you allow your child to deal with it on their own, to seek outside help, which would require your child to be an advocate for themselves, and not all kids are. That means go to the teacher for help, stay after school, go early. Kids with ADHD don't tend to do those types of things. Or you need to bring in somebody else to deal with it and to help your child do two things. One is to be able to plan what they have and be able to have, basically a way of keeping track of when things are due. And then the other is to get the content done, to get the math done, to get the science done, whatever it is. But often parents, if they can, step back and allow somebody else to do that, that's really, really helpful. And if that's not a possibility, pick one subject and agree on that with your child. Usually there's something you both can agree upon. But I love the idea, if you cannot afford a tutor or can't afford outside help or don't want to go in that direction, sitting down with your child and completely opening the dialogue and being very transparent is the first step. And that's when you want to set up an appointment to talk. And so you might say to your child, hey, Jimmy, could we sit down after dinner tonight at around 7:30 and talk about the school year? So you're not throwing it on your child when they just walked in the door. You're not throwing it on your child in a moment of weakness when you're upset. but you're saying, can we talk about it? And you might say, you know what, I think you're right. Last year was just so stressful. I'm wondering if we can come up with other ways. And you would be surprised how creative kids are. And oftentimes you will be able to reach a happy medium with them.
Mm-hmm. This mom asks, my 13-year-old son's teachers give him too much homework. We all know that. He feels overwhelmed before he sits down to do it. Are teachers ever amenable to reducing homework load for kids? I talked with his teachers last year, and they thought we were trying to get away with a fast one, rather than seeing it as a real help for him.
What I would first do is have documentation as to how long it's really helping your child, because sometimes what we think isn't always accurate. So what I mean by that is for about a week, keep track of the assignments your child has and how long it's taking him. So you might write down Monday, science, 45 minutes, English, a half hour. And that way, when you go and talk to the teacher, it's never an emotional conversation. It's not, oh my gosh, Jimmy has so much homework and I can't take it anymore. But it's just, I've noticed that Jimmy seems to have more homework than is the county regulation, or he has more homework than I think you may have assigned. And that way you have data. It's not just an emotional thing, but you can say, well, on Monday he had 45 minutes, on Tuesday he had this, and on Wednesday he had that. And oftentimes, I will tell you, when I was a teacher, I had no idea the struggles my kids faced at home when it came to homework. I was totally oblivious because I didn't know what happened behind closed doors. They came to school the next day with their work done. So I had no idea what went on in their homes. And it wasn't until I had my own child with ADHD that I realized, this is really tough. This is really hard. And teachers often don't know. And until you tell them in a very diplomatic way, they may never know.
Mm-hmm. In that same vein, in terms of dealing with school, one parent, Deb, asks, what kind of supports or accommodations can we ask for in order to make homework easier? Do you have any insights on that, what they might ask for? Okay.
It depends on what is in your child's IEP or your 504, and oftentimes what's in there isn't being followed. So if you do have a 504 and IEP, first step would be to go back and look at that and see if there are any parameters for homework. And if your child doesn't have anything, doesn't have formal accommodations, I found that teachers are actually really willing to give accommodations once you let them know what's happening in a very non-judgmental way. I like using the words I've noticed because you don't want to ask for accommodations by saying, Jimmy has way too much homework. This is ridiculous. I thought in fourth grade he should be getting 40 minutes, but he's doing 2 hours of homework. It's never going to go well. But if you say, I noticed that Jimmy is having about 2 hours of homework every night, and I don't think that that's what you're assigning. I'm wondering if we could come up with a way to reduce the amount he's getting. And it may be that, depending on the grade, he studies 15 words instead of 20, that you can type a final copy, or that he just does the odd questions on a math sheet. It's much harder to do that in high school if your child is taking any advanced classes, because really they do need to turn in most of the work. But when they're younger, elementary and middle school, I've found that teachers are very willing to make accommodations if they're approached in the right way.
Mm-hmm. That's good advice. Here's a parent, I guess it's a little old schoolish. At what age do we stop being homework police and let our child suffer the consequences at school of not handing in assignments? We've had several questions like this.
Mm-hmm. That's such a great question. It's very dependent on the student. I think sometimes I've been in this situation with parents before when they've said, I've just had it. I can't take it anymore. My child is just going to have to deal with this on their own. I'm disengaging. And that I can tell you that never goes well. It doesn't work to just take a completely hands-off approach when you've been hand-holding your child the whole time. So you really have to back off slowly. And for those kids that you have been micromanaging everything, you've been checking their homework portal to make sure everything's turned in, I would start by having a conversation with the teacher to explain the situation and talk to them about what accommodations they could make or to help them be aware of the situation. I think it is okay to back off, but you have to do it. It's kind of like weaning somebody off of something. You have to do it slowly, and you can't all of a sudden do it at one time. But I do think, anytime as parents we make the environment ripe for learning, we're going to have better results. So instead of saying, this is your homework, you need to do it and turn it in, what you can do is say, this is your homework, certainly you have to do it and turn it in, but I can tell you from 7 to 8 every night, it's electronics-free time, and nobody in the house is going to be using electronics, and everybody's going to be working on something. That way at least they are doing homework during that time, and it probably should be in a public place. So you're pulling back your involvement, but at the same time, that they're actually completing something.
Mm-hmm.
I do think it's okay, though, honestly, because parents ask that a lot. At what point should you just say, enough is enough? And I think with young kids, you do want to help them to get started, and then as much as possible walk away. And that's really a good frame of reference for kids of all ages to say, okay, what do you have to do today, and when will you do it? And then allow them to go about it, and then check in on them just a few times. And have a stop time too. That's often very helpful.
One parent says, is it true that you should never let your child or teen do homework in the bedroom, in his bedroom?
I used to think that was true. I personally am not a huge fan of the bedroom, but from personal experience, I don't know if that's always correct. My son, who actually wrote a really great blog on motivation, and sometimes I think ADHD is the disorder of motivation. He wrote he's 17 now, he wrote this really great blog on what it's like to struggle with motivation from a teenager's perspective, and it's on our website at ectutoring.com/blog. And, one of the things he talks about that really helped him, which I was so against until last year, was setting up a homework space in his room. And he had this small desk that, was okay, but he wanted this huge L-shaped desk, and he ordered it off of Staples, and he put it together himself, which I couldn't believe he did that because it had a million parts. And then he bought, we split the cost for these dual monitors, and he has these huge dual monitors on his desk. And he has made that really, really work for him in his room. And so I think for some kids it can work, but I'd probably be leery of it initially.
Speaking of homework spaces, a parent asks, how do I create a great homework space for my daughter that would actually be conducive to starting and completing homework? Are there any things you've seen that have worked in terms of furniture or physical environs?
Mm-hmm. There are lots of neat things. One of the things we often think of, like, what should the desk be like? Should I have little containers for markers? Honestly, those little things don't matter that much. But think of bigger picture. So a large desk is often really helpful. A window in the space is super helpful. And also the chair is equally as important. I think sometimes we forget about the chair. I've had a lot of kids over the years like those exercise ball chairs, and now they have them where they have little feet, they have backs to them, so they're more supportive. But they like them because they often say, oh, I kind of bounce when I'm working, and that makes me more alert. And so I think as you're thinking of the space, it doesn't as much matter about, the little details, but it does matter that the location is relatively distraction-free. It's never going to be perfect. There's not a TV in the room, and that the chair is really adequate for your student.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any particular names there, or you just want to keep that general?
I can't remember. If you Google exercise ball chair, you can find a number of different places that sell them. They're pretty common on the market.
Mm-hmm. A dad asks, do you know if certain types of music or white noise help kids do homework? Do you have any recommendations there?
Sure. So there's actually a lot of research on music, and the research shows that music as a whole is really not conducive to retention of information. And that means if you're studying for a test and you have music on in the background, you're not going to remember as much as if you don't have any music at all. So, when we think of music, we know that music without lyrics is better for kids than music with lyrics, because really with music with lyrics, you're dividing your attention between listening to the words and doing your homework. So if you can find a happy medium for kids where maybe they have a homework playlist where it's familiar music, so they're not really listening to all of the words, but they are listening to the rhythm, that's better than new music that they haven't heard before.
Mm-hmm.
But kids with ADHD, honestly, they swear by music. They often say, I have to have music. And if we as parents take it away, it's never really a good thing. But I tell you, there's other things that are on in the same room. Having lots of screens open at the bottom of the laptop when kids are doing homework online. There's a direct correlation to the number of applications a person has open and their attention. So certainly if kids have fewer apps open, they're going to be more focused.
Here's a real-life example here. I spend, my son is 16 and a junior in high school. Last night he was on the computer, supposedly writing an essay for 2 hours. He told us it was done. When we asked to see it, guess what? Nothing. I lost it totally. I went berserk. It was 10 p.m. He was up until 2:30 a.m., and he does take medication. We took his phone away for the day, but nothing works, punishment or reward. So I know that's a difficult question, but I just thought you might help this parent navigate that a little.
Sure, that is such a difficult thing. And when you found that, rewards and consequences, and it feels like you're at a point where you don't know what to do, and there's clearly a huge power struggle between you and your child, that's really time to get outside help in the form of a counselor. And often a professional can help you navigate those really tricky waters, because what you don't want to happen is for your child to completely disengage, not only from you, but from schoolwork in general. It never goes in the right direction. So I would say at this point, reach out to a private counselor. You can certainly talk to your school counselor, but often those people, here in our public school system, the model is 300 students to one counselor. They may not have time, but somebody who works with kids with ADHD can be especially helpful. I would also take a minute to step back and just completely reassess the situation with your child and really set up a time to talk and sit down and have that heart-to-heart and say to your child, you know what, I feel really bad about this situation. This isn't working, and what can we do about it? We love you so much. And really allow his voice to be heard too.
Mm-hmm. A lot of parents have said they make impassioned pleas about doing homework, even really not riding their kids too hard in terms of them doing it, but the kids just say they don't care. I don't care whether I do it or not. So how does a parent, does this also involve a counselor perhaps about how a parent gets through to a child to actually provide that connective tissue about doing homework and what it might mean to his or her future?
That's really tricky because especially, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, and there are a lot of type A people here, and they're just very successful, real go-getters. And when their kids are not type A, when they're kind of type B or even type C, it just really fractures the relationship. And even though their kids may be turning in the majority of assignments, the parent's perception of the situation is often far more dire than it really is. And so I think I would look at the big picture and figure out, all right, is it that he's generally a good student and I need to leave it alone, or is it that he really isn't turning in anything? Because that's a completely different story, not turning in work at all. And in that, you want to look for other signs. Is your child still hanging out with friends, or is he playing Xbox in the basement a lot of hours a day? All of those signs, when you see a downward spiral, could be something far more than a homework issue that you definitely want to get professional help around. But for, the garden variety issue where the child says they don't care, I found that that's rarely true. They say they don't care to us, but really they do care, but they just feel so pressured, even though we think we're really not pressuring them. That's how they perceive it. And they cannot see the future. And as much as we drive them around to college campuses and we show them what their SAT scores and their GPA needs to look like to get into this school or that school, they're impacted so much with looking at the future that they are in the here and now, and it's very hard for them to understand the consequences later on.
Yeah. A lot of experts often say, do homework with a friend, get a homework buddy. Does that actually work?
Absolutely. And, I love Skype and FaceTime for that reason. And that's super powerful because it gives kids accountability. In fact, in that blog I was telling you about, my son actually wrote about that, and he gave tips to parents and kids. And he said, this is actually a really great way to get your homework done, but you need to be, as parents, we need to be careful and make sure that actually it is getting done and it's with people that are fairly responsible. So, if your child is always online with a kid who isn't a great student and doesn't do homework, they're probably not a good match. But if they can kind of align themselves with kids that are generally responsible, it will provide accountability to your student. And the best thing to do is for kids to develop the parameters first and to say to the other kids online, whether it's Google Hangouts, for example, all right, before we get started, let's clarify what we're going to do. We're going to finish this worksheet, or we're going to study these 10 vocabulary words together. But I just love media for that opportunity, because a lot of kids with ADHD, when they know that they have to be online in a Google Hangout at 4 o'clock to discuss Chapter 2, it just allows them to be responsible for that, and they're far more likely to do it than if they just had the appointment with themselves.
Yeah. Mary has a question. What do you suggest for children/families who are highly scheduled in the evening with sports, lessons, etc., which means homework starts late and not necessarily at the same time each evening?
I would use any time you have to get homework done. And so if your kids are in the car, have supplies in the car so that they can do homework. Markers, pens, a clipboard so they have something flat to write on. But if that is your life and your kids are overscheduled, and many families are like that, you have to use every opportunity. Because we know that our kids need a lot of sleep, we certainly don't want to go too late in the night to be getting homework done. So using that time right after school can be really helpful. And if you find that it's causing a lot of stress for your kids and they're not able to get everything done, you may want to consider reducing activities to two activities, like soccer and piano, for example, for each child.
Speaking of that, you mentioned sleep. I was wondering how self-care or nutrition and sleep and exercise, etc., factors into the homework equation. I mean, a teen who's not getting much sleep will probably, not pay much attention in school, and at the tail end of it, probably be very unmotivated. I don't know how you get your kids to change their lifestyle routines, but I would imagine that plays into not getting homework done.
Right. And so that is so true, Wayne. That's absolutely a big concern. Many families have a charging station in their home, so they may have the policy that everything electronic goes onto the charging station at 10 o'clock, for example. And that way, your kids see the end time. They know they have to get their work done by 10 o'clock because their laptop, their iPad, their phone, whatever it might be, is downstairs on the charging station. And everybody in the house puts their electronics there. That allows kids to unwind because we all know that when kids are looking at media late at night, it just gives them that second wind. That blue light just makes them more alert again, and they're staying up all over. They get that second wind, and it's not conducive to sleep. And we know that through a lot of research that when kids aren't getting enough sleep, they're just not rehashing the day's events, and that's how what you've learned goes into long-term memory. It's through sleep. And so sleep is actually a very, very powerful study skill that we kind of overlook. But, anytime our kids can get adequate sleep, they're going to remember more of what they've studied during the day. Similarly, there's a lot of research on aerobic exercise, and it's really just 10 minutes of aerobic exercise that can heighten attention. And so for a lot of kids we work with that are athletes, they will carry a clipboard with them. And when they're on the bus, they know after a practice or after a game, oftentimes they are actually pretty alert, and they're willing to do something for 10 minutes. And using those short blocks of time is really great for ADHD kids because it's so much easier to do something for 10 minutes than a half hour, and they're often far more willing to do that.
Can you ever get to school or their homework clubs where kids try to get their homework done at school before they even get home? I mean, I don't know if you're aware of those or if they're helpful.
I think they're fantastic. Many schools have them. So you just have to have very clear understanding of what's going to be accomplished. Sometimes there's just a bunch of kids in a room and there's really no oversight. But it is a control place for kids to get work done. They just may not have access to somebody who can help them with math or somebody who can help them with their physics homework or something like that. But during those times, kids can at least get the homework done that they're familiar with and that they can do independently. Same with aftercare for elementary school kids. Sometimes parents will say, my kid won't do homework in aftercare. And they will do homework in aftercare if it's something that they know how to do. So, for example, if they have a reoccurring spelling assignment and they know how to do that, they've done it every week, that's something that they absolutely should get done in aftercare.
And I guess this last question has to do with what you termed as a rushers. Apparently, the parents ride, this is a 13-year-old, ride their daughter to get the work done. And I guess finally she sort of dashes it off, but she won't check her work, and her parents can't get her to check her work. So it's just a mishmash, and she hands it in, and it's not done all that well. Is there any way to get a child to slow down first, I guess, or second of all, check their work?
Well, I did talk a little bit about that before. I mentioned designated homework time, setting aside 10 minutes per grade level, and making sure that's the time your child does homework. Also, as they go along, have them circle the ones that are hard for them and just go back and check those. It's unrealistic to expect your child to check the whole thing. But at the same time, I really think, in terms of having kids go back and check work, I personally like to leave the quality to the teacher. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the parent's domain. You can even say to the teacher, I'm really struggling with this. Johnny has a hard time going back and checking his work, and I'm not sure what my role here is. I just wanted to let you know, not all this will be his work. And that way, he gets feedback from the teacher and not from you, and that is far more powerful for any child. So I tend to let the quality be left to the teacher.
That's very good. Good advice. Well, Ann, I just wanted to thank you again for your insights and strategies on homework. They really were great. And
thank you so much.
I can tell by all the comments, people saying these are great ideas, that our audience really loved them. So thanks again for coming. We all appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Wayne.
Sure. And for everyone else, we're grateful to all of you for listening in. Next week on September 9th, Shelley Haven will talk about great assistive learning tools for middle schoolers and high schoolers. So we'll see you then, and have a good day, everyone.